night of April 26, 1986, a quiet region in Eastern Europe became the center of one of the most devastating technological disasters in human history. What began as a routine safety test at a nuclear power plant quickly turned into a catastrophe that would affect millions of people and leave a permanent scar on the land. Within seconds, a powerful explosion released radioactive material into the atmosphere, contaminating vast areas of Europe. The event would later be known as the Chernobyl disaster, a tragedy that changed how the world views nuclear energy and technological responsibility. Subscribe to History as It Was Lived, where the past is told as it was truly experienced. To understand how such a disaster could happen, we must first look at the political and technological environment of the time. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union was determined to prove its strength in science and industry. Nuclear power represented progress, modernity, and national pride. The government invested heavily in building nuclear power plants across its vast territory, hoping to supply electricity to growing cities while also demonstrating technological superiority to the rest of the world. In this atmosphere of competition and ambition, large nuclear projects became symbols of the Soviet Union's vision for the future. One of these ambitious projects was the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant, located in northern Ukraine, about 130 kilometers north of Kyiv. Construction of the facility began in the 1970s, and it was designed to become one of the most powerful nuclear energy centers in the region. The plant contained several reactors capable of producing enormous amounts of electricity for the Soviet power grid. Engineers and government officials saw the facility as a triumph of modern engineering and a sign of technological advancement. Near the power plant, the Soviet government built a brand new city specifically for the workers and their families. The city was called Pripyat, and it quickly became a vibrant and modern community. Pripyat was designed to represent the ideal Soviet city of the future. Wide streets, modern apartment buildings, schools, hospitals, parks, and cultural centers filled the city. The population was young and optimistic, with an average age of about 26. Many residents were engineers, technicians, and specialists working at the nuclear power plant. Life in Pripyat was energetic and hopeful. Children attended well-equipped schools. Families spent evenings in parks, and workers felt proud to be part of a project that symbolized scientific progress. An amusement park was even scheduled to open in early May of 1986 to celebrate the city's growth. For the nearly 50,000 residents living there, Pripyat felt like a modern and prosperous place where the future looked bright. Few people could imagine that their city would soon become one of the most famous ghost towns in the world. By 1986, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant had been operating for several years, producing electricity for large parts of the Soviet Union. Although the reactors were powerful and efficient, they contained several dangerous design flaws that were not fully understood by the operators working there. The reactors used a design known as RBMK, which allowed them to generate large amounts of energy. However, under certain conditions, these reactors could become unstable and extremely difficult to control. One of the most significant problems with the RBMK reactor design was that it behaved unpredictably at low power levels. Instead of stabilizing when power decreased, the nuclear reaction could suddenly accelerate. This instability made careful operation essential. Unfortunately, the full dangers of this design were not widely communicated to the plant operators. As a result, the workers responsible for controlling the reactor were not fully aware of how risky certain operating conditions could become. The events that led to the disaster began on April 25, 1986, when engineers planned to perform a safety test on reactor number 4. The purpose of the experiment was to determine whether the reactor's turbines could continue generating electricity for a short time after a power loss. This small amount of electricity would keep cooling pumps running until emergency backup generators started. In theory, the test was meant to improve safety procedures. However, the test required the reactor to operate under unusual conditions. Throughout the day, the reactor's power level was gradually reduced as operators prepared for the experiment. Unfortunately, the procedure did not go exactly as planned. The regional electrical grid unexpectedly requested that the reactor continue supplying electricity longer than expected. This forced the operators to delay the test for several hours, leaving the reactor in a partially powered state much longer than intended. By the time the experiment resumed late at night, a new group of operators had taken over the control room. These night shift workers had not been fully briefed about the earlier delays and complications. As they attempted to continue the test, the reactor's power suddenly dropped far lower than planned. Instead of operating at a stable level, the reactor entered a dangerous and unstable condition. To recover the lost power, the operators began removing control rods from the reactor core. Control rods are designed to absorb neutrons and slow the nuclear reaction inside the reactor. Removing them increases the reactor's power output. However, strict safety rules required that a certain number of control rods remain inside the reactor at all times. In their effort to stabilize the reactor, the operators removed too many of these rods, violating important safety guidelines. As the experiment continued, several automatic safety systems were also disabled to prevent them from interfering with the test. These systems were designed to shut down the reactor if dangerous conditions occurred. With them turned off, the reactor was left without critical protective mechanisms. Shortly after 1:23 in the morning on April 26th, the operators began the final stage of the test. At this moment, the reactor was already in a highly unstable state. Steam pressure started building within the cooling system as water circulation changed. This caused the nuclear reaction inside the reactor to accelerate rapidly. Within seconds, the reactor's power surged to levels far beyond its safe operating limits. The operators realized something was terribly wrong and pressed the emergency shutdown button, known as AZ5. This button was supposed to immediately stop the nuclear reaction by inserting control rods into the reactor core. However, due to a fatal design flaw, the control rods briefly increased the reaction as they entered the reactor. This sudden spike in power triggered an uncontrollable chain reaction. At exactly 1:23:40 a.m., reactor number 4 exploded. The explosion was enormous. A massive blast tore through the reactor building, lifting a 2,000-ton concrete lid off the reactor and destroying much of the structure. Moments later, a second explosion followed, sending burning graphite and radioactive debris high into the night sky. The reactor core was completely exposed to the open air. Flames erupted across the facility as pieces of radioactive material scattered across the surrounding area. Workers inside the plant were thrown to the ground by the force of the explosion. Many of them initially believed that a simple industrial accident had occurred. Few realized that the nuclear reactor itself had been destroyed. Radiation levels near the reactor rose to extreme levels within minutes. Firefighters were quickly called to the scene to extinguish the flames. Brave emergency crews arrived within minutes and began climbing onto the roofs of nearby buildings to battle the fires. These firefighters had no protective suits and no knowledge of the extreme radiation surrounding them. Scattered across the roof were pieces of burning graphite from the reactor core. These fragments were intensely radioactive, yet firefighters handled them without realizing the danger. Many of them began experiencing symptoms of radiation sickness within hours. Despite the danger, the firefighters continued working throughout the night, preventing the flames from spreading to other reactors at the facility. Their actions likely prevented an even greater catastrophe. Many of these first responders later died from radiation exposure, and they are remembered as some of the earliest heroes of the disaster. Meanwhile, life continued normally in the nearby city of Pripyat. Residents woke up on the morning of April 26th, unaware that a nuclear reactor had exploded just a few kilometers away. From their apartment balconies, some people could see smoke rising from the plant and a strange glow above the damaged reactor. Children played outdoors while invisible radioactive particles drifted through the air. People gathered on bridges and streets to watch the distant fire, unaware that they were being exposed to dangerous levels of radiation. For nearly 36 hours, the authorities did not inform the public about the true nature of the disaster. Eventually, the Soviet government organized an evacuation of Pripyat. Hundreds of buses arrived in the city to transport residents away from their homes. People were instructed to pack only essential belongings and were told that they would return in a few days, once the situation was under control. Most residents left their homes expecting to come back soon. They never returned. Pripyat was abandoned almost overnight, leaving behind empty buildings, schools, hospitals, and homes filled with personal belongings. Toys, photographs, and furniture remained exactly where they had been left. Meanwhile, radioactive material from the explosion spread across Europe. Radiation monitoring stations in several countries began detecting unusual levels of contamination. One of the first nations to notice these abnormal readings was Sweden, where workers at a nuclear plant discovered radiation on their clothing. At first, they believed their own facility might be leaking radiation, but further investigation revealed that the contamination had traveled from somewhere else. International pressure eventually forced Soviet authorities to acknowledge that a serious nuclear accident had occurred at Chernobyl. In response, the Soviet Union launched one of the largest emergency cleanup operations in history. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers, engineers, and volunteers were sent to the disaster zone. These workers became known as liquidators. Their task was to contain the damaged reactor and prevent further contamination. Helicopters dropped sand, lead, and boron onto the burning reactor in an attempt to reduce radiation and extinguish fires. Workers cleared radioactive debris from rooftops and surrounding buildings. Some of these operations were extremely dangerous. Workers were sometimes allowed to remain near the reactor for less than 2 minutes before retreating to safety. Robots were initially used for some cleanup tasks, but the intense radiation quickly destroyed their electronics. As a result, human workers had to complete many of the most dangerous tasks themselves. Later in 1986, engineers constructed a massive concrete structure around the destroyed reactor. This structure, known as the sarcophagus, was designed to seal the reactor and trap radioactive materials inside. Decades later, an even larger steel structure called the New Safe Confinement was built to cover the reactor and prevent further leaks. Today, the region surrounding the reactor is known as the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone. This restricted area covers thousands of square kilometers where most human activity is forbidden. Entire villages remain abandoned, and buildings slowly decay as nature reclaims the land. Trees grow through broken streets, and wildlife now thrives in areas once filled with human activity. The disaster left a lasting impact on the world. It revealed serious problems in reactor design, emergency response, and government transparency. It also forced countries around the world to rethink nuclear safety standards. Even decades later, the story of Chernobyl continues to remind us of the enormous power of technology and the responsibility that comes with controlling it. The silent ruins of Pripyat still stand today, frozen in time, reminding the world of the night when a routine test became one of the greatest disasters in human history. This was history as it was lived. Subscribe for more stories that shaped our world.